My name is Jason J. Rock Houston, and you're listening to Chaotic Risk Magazine. We can be found on the web at www.chaoticrisk.com. And our guest, as usual, for this is Gar Borras. And today we're talking to Gar for On the Record about one of his favorite all-time albums, which is the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club. And we're going to talk to Gar about kind of why this album had such a huge influence on him. So let's get right into it, Gar, and tell us, this is really kind of an interesting album. It's kind of towards the end of the Beatles' career. So let's get into it. Tell me, how this album and the Beatles specifically came on your radar.
Well, it was such a difference maker compared to all of the other hugely successful releases by the Beatles, simply because when they came out with this, I think they realized it was going to be impossible to be able to reproduce
what came before
these songs live.
Yeah.
The technology wasn't there. See, nowadays the technology is there where with digital backing tracks you would be able to do it, and the sound quality would be incredible. But back then that technology did not exist, and they were actually at the forefront of adding sounds to their music, kind of a la Pink Floyd, what they were doing with Dark Side of the Moon, with Money, and different, you know what I mean?
Yeah, even the Beach Boys kind of did that with their album Pet Sounds, which was a little different from what they would typically do.
The Beach Boys, I believe, felt that they were in competition with the Beatles because my impression, it's just my impression.
Kind of
it's not something that you can, etch in stone, but they were the American
version
band.
Yeah,
and hugely successful, churning out hugely successful songs. And they looked at Beatles as competition because every time the Beatles would come out with something, they would try to top it. They would feel the necessity to try to outdo.
Yeah, I mean, even when we're referring to the Beatles, people refer to it as Beatle mania, especially when they first came over here to the United States. I mean, it was such hysteria. I mean, they'd never seen anything like the Beatles, and just so people have a kind of time frame of when we're talking. I mean, this album specifically came out May 26, 1967. So
and that's a long time ago. But they they had already been hugely successful for quite a while before they came out with Sgt. Pepper. I think Sgt. Pepper was like their eighth
studio album. Yes, that's what I was reading.
And that's a by most
pretty
standards,
massive.
That's a hugely successful career, just to be able to come out with 8 hugely successful. But I was, see, that's the thing is during the time that the Beatles were having all this huge success, I was just a little kid, with all of the older people in my family, cousins and things like that were, kind of, making me aware. Say, for example, before the Beatles came to the United States, I was just a little kid. This is the early 60s, I think 61 something.
So I'm assuming your folks
I think when they came to the United States, it was either 62 or 63.
Yeah, something like that. So I'm assuming
my family was out in Georgia visiting our family, our side of the family that lived out in Georgia, because we lived here in California, and I was, I had my mother had a sister that was the youngest sister, and she had this magazine that was kind of like a circus magazine, but it was early 60s. Yeah. It wasn't circus, but it was one of those that had all of the popular heartthrob girls, teen magazine kind of thing.
It's kind of interesting you bring that up, because I mean...
It all this stuff about the Beatles,
Wow.
and she was just going off about the Beatles, and I knew nothing about them. And so this was just, and you have to understand, this is like the early 60s, so I was really, really young. And so there was this big hoopla about the Beatles that I was becoming aware of before they came to the United States.
Yeah.
And then it became this big deal thing that it was on the news, and it was like everywhere. The Beatles are coming. The Beatles are coming. And it was like, you're, as a kid, you're scratching your head. You're going, what is the big deal
about it's a rock band.
These guys coming, to America? What's this big deal? And then so finally they flew over, and it was, there was a huge crowd waiting for them at the airport in New York. And then they wound up doing the Ed Sullivan Show, and I'm watching this because the curiosity is just off the hook.
And I got to tell people that don't know, that was like one of their all-time favorite, most famous TV appearances ever. One of the first here in the U.S. too,
Yeah, to be on the Ed Sullivan Show, that was the launching ground back in the early 60s for virtually every major act.
Yeah.
Stevie Wonder was launched on the Ed Sullivan Show.
You can see
the Doors
Stevie Wonder.
In trouble. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Everybody that was on the Ed Sullivan Show was top level. Whether you were a musical act or a comedian act or whatever act you were top level to get on that show. So it wasn't just some TV show. It was like the elite of the toppest cream that rise to the top only got on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Yeah. Definitely.
So when they were on this show, everybody was at their. I mean, it's hard for people to fathom today.
Yeah.
But everybody was glued to their TV when the Beatles came to the USA and they were on the Ed Sullivan Show. It was announced on the news that crime went down because everybody was so,
checking it out that night
to their TV like a magnet.
Oh, that's amazing.
You know what I mean? It was just so insane, the profound effect that the Beatles had when they came to America. And it was just like, and I'm watching them perform, and you could barely hear them playing because the girls in the audience, the audience was just nothing but all these teenage girls, and they're screaming their heads off.
Wow.
And I turn around and I look at my mom and I go, why are they crying? Because I couldn't understand. I was so
young at the time. I
couldn't understand why the girls were crying and why they were screaming. And the best answer my mom could give me was that they were crying because they were so happy.
Wow.
And I really didn't know about this, that extreme, that you would be so happy. It was hard for me to get my mind wrapped around this because I was so young. That these girls would be so happy that they would be crying.
I mean, as a child, that's kind of your first experience of what really tears of joy are. I mean, as your mom was trying to kind of make you understand, but because as a kid, you're thinking, I think you only cry when you're sad, or when something bad happens.
And I was having real difficult time getting my mind wrapped around that. And so, in all of my life, of course, I had only been on the earth for a short amount of time at that time, but I had never seen anything like that, where there was this kind of hysteria, a literal hysteria.
I dare say, Gar,
at this time.
That's what Beatle mania looks like. All those girls, all those tears.
I've never seen that since. So there was, and because they've been around for such a long time, and it's so like old, and
I mean,
people look at it now, they don't really grasp how they had such a huge, profound effect on everything. They had a profound effect on music. It was a dividing line. There was music before the Beatles.
Oh yeah.
And then there was music after the Beatles. I mean, it's a literal dividing line.
Yeah, that's a great point.
How dramatic music had changed
because of this one band
once they hit.
Yeah, and
then they had a profound effect on fashion, because before that, if you had long hair, you were considered a
hippie or something.
Extremely lowest of low.
Low life hippie.
And they made long hair popular. And then when you look now back at them, when that was considered long hair.
Yeah.
and it's by today's standards, that's considered short hair.
Yeah, I mean, they got nothing on David Lee Roth, you know what I mean?
They just, what was considered at that time long hair was crazy. It looks short to me now.
Oh, yeah.
Back in those days, that was considered long hair. And, before that, nobody had long hair.
And
after they hit, boom, long hair exploded.
Everything the Beatles did.
Fashion. There was the clothing. I remember embracing the fashion that the Beatles was bringing, and I would go. I would have my parents buy me bell bottoms and buy me beetle boots, and I was totally immersed by all of this, and this is way before I got involved in playing music.
Yeah.
But it had everything to do with enticing me to want it, to just make me gravitate towards music.
Wow.
But I used to get in fights at school because I would show up with bell bottoms and beetle boots and all of this stuff. And I think I told you about that in another interview.
Yeah.
How I was one of those that just dove head first into it, and the way that everything that was a shock to everyone when I was going to school dressed like this, and literally got ridiculed and picked on and got in fights and everything. But then it didn't take that long that next thing you know, everybody was doing what I was doing. But in the very, very beginning, there was a huge rejection, because it was a shock. It was a culture shock. And so the Beatles, were more than just a musical group. They were more than just these songs and stuff like that. They were a huge force in a social shift.
Yeah.
What band can you think of that would have that kind of a profound effect, where it would, some other bands had some effect on social shifts and things like that, but to nowhere near the degree that the Beatles did. When you measure it, it was just a huge, gigantic social shift.
Oh yeah,
that occurred when the Beatles hit, compared to what others have done since. But it was very profound. And as a kid, whenever they came out with new albums and new stuff, everybody was just couldn't wait for it to come out, and it was just became hugely successful, and it just seemed like they had this ability to just churn out songs.
Oh yeah, One thing about the Beatles, I think they definitely have they definitely have the songs, if you know what I mean. They were all great songwriters. That's what anybody that really cites the Beatles as an influence, they talk about the music, the songs, obviously, but and what great songs those are. I mean, I think I was sharing with you on one of these recent interviews. I recently picked up a copy of a compilation. It's like a greatest hits collection. It's called the Number Ones. Now, oddly enough, you'll get all they have 27 number one hits. So you get all 27 of those hits that actually charted and made it all the way to number one, But that's pretty amazing for any band to have that many number one hits, I mean, not even Madonna or Elton John.
Being a musician and eventually becoming, a huge thing about songwriting and all of that stuff. Virtually every song, no matter what album or what, every song was completely different.
Yeah, that's true.
They all stood on their own, and they, you didn't hear people saying, "Oh, this is another I Want to Hold Your Hand."
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll give you a good example of what you're saying. I think we discussed this too in one of the previous interviews, which is now most people when they think of what's referred to as heavy metal, they'll cite like Steppenwolf because of that song "Born to Be Wild." They'll say that's like the closest thing to metal that ever came out, but I dare say what predates that is the Beatles. And if you look at song Helter Skelter, or even the Beatles version, that is such a metal song. I mean, it's like that's the hardest thing you're going to really hear out of the Beatles, and that predates the Motley Crue version, obviously. But that just goes to show, they kind of seen what was down the line, I guess.
Well, yeah, they were obviously had a lot of things to pull from to influence each song in a different way. So each song wasn't just another something previous that they did.
Yeah.
But by the time they came out with Sgt. Pepper's, they were reaching a point where they were fusing music with art. Yeah. Because when you looked at that album cover, it had an artistic flair to how they decided to do that cover, where it had a lot of famous people, but a lot of famous people that had absolutely nothing to do with each other.
Oh yeah, now I got to ask you, because you're obviously a little older than I, Gar. I also heard that there was a movie kind of based on the album where you had people like Alice Cooper and the Bee Gees appearing. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, and by the time they came out with that production got panned.
That's one thing I heard.
it was considered contrived. It was all about just making money.
Yeah, I think Peter Frampton was even in it.
And let's throw every big named artist and have them do their little bit in this whole thing. And that was also the crowning jewel of that Sgt. Pepper's movie thing that they came out with was Peter Frampton. And because Peter Frampton was so insanely popular at that time, it was just that thing that put it over the top that made everybody feel that it was so contrived. It was all, let's get the most popular of the most popular of the most popular. So that really never went well.
Yeah, and
the critics panned it.
Yeah.
I think the public felt that it was so contrived and everything like that, that it really didn't embrace anything that
do with the
what
album.
the Beatles were bringing to the table. It just had this feeling that, people were at a boardroom around a big table. I know what we should do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It had more of that kind of a feel to it than anything,
having to do with the album
that had anything to do with hitting where the young public was.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think their goal was to let's get all the big acts that are going on right now. Peter Frampton, Alice Cooper,
Yeah. It was a
Bee Gees.
literal parade of who's who that was really popular at the time. And it just felt very contrived.
Yeah, now, and again, we got to make people realize, as we're talking about this in 2020, and we're saying it came out in 1967, this album recently celebrated its 50th anniversary. I mean, that's how far back the Beatles go.
Well, it kind of gives you how old I am.
Yeah, okay, yeah, you're just a few years old. Yeah, I got you. But that's why I think you've got, you always seem to, when we do these conversations, that's why I like talking to you. You seem to have your pulse, your finger right on the pulse of music, and you're really well versed in music history, and you know about all these bands. So that's why I love talking.
It's because I lived it.
Yeah.
I was there, and what I was enjoying, I wasn't the only one enjoying it at that time.
Yeah.
It was something that was being introduced to me by the people that were older than me.
Yeah.
And it was a huge deal to them. And of course it just kind of, became hugely influential on me.
Yeah.
But this was it was during a time that I had not become a musician quite yet.
Yeah, you're kind of in your
picked up a musical instrument, but it sure was a huge carrot in front of me, that just led me down the path, that I wound up traveling and became part of my DNA, part of my soul. That this is how, when you have things like, profound societal effects that the Beatles had, that you experienced during your life, that you witnessed, and you saw the profound effect. There's only when you're a person like me and you have that somewhere in your soul, it just becomes part of you. It just becomes that whole motivator. You watch them, perform and everything, and you see, how when they played at the Dodgers Stadium, there was a girl that lived across the street that was older than me, that, she went to that concert, and it was such a huge deal to her to be able to go to that concert. And, it's just... it's hard for people to fathom because people nowadays, things like that don't happen nowadays.
Oh yeah, and talking about the Beatles,
I'm waiting for something to happen because I just feel it in my bones. There's going to be something, that might happen again. That the current generations will be able to experience, that will be their own, that will have huge societal shifts, for the better. For the arts. And for young people to embrace and to be excited about. And that, if it wasn't for the Beatles, music would not have changed to become what it became in the 70s, and then eventually develop into what it became in the 80s, and then what it developed to become in the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
If it wasn't for this huge shift that happened, that was all started by the Beatles, who knows? All I can do is speculate, what things would be like now. But I just don't think that they would have been the same had it not been for this huge shift that was all started by the Beatles.
Yeah, and I'll give you a little extra trivia on this specific album. I was reading on the Wikipedia. Okay, this album was like number one both in the UK and the United States, and interestingly enough, that the album was this is like one of the first Beatles albums ever at that time to be loved by critics and fans, and just everybody loved it. All the reviews were great and everything. It was like the best received album from the public, and part of the reason for that was not just the music, but the fact that I think we were talking in an earlier interview. When Kiss released their Kiss Alive 1 album, that for 1975, which is a few years after this came out, they put out that Kiss Alive 1 album, and if you're talking about the vinyl, like it was a double gatefold thing you could open up, and a lot of people haven't seen anything like that. But this Sgt Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club came out in '67. It was known just as much for the artwork as the way they designed it and all the creative artwork. I mean, they took the time to come up with all that interesting looking stuff that was on the album cover and the way they kind of packaged it. So it was known just as much for the art as the music, and that was one of the first times the band had done anything like that.
Yes. And then as a little kid, when you're seeing all this and you're just like,
what is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Sgt. Pepper's, virtually every single song on that album was really, really good.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, like some of my favorite.
They all became very, very popular, and then ending with a day in the life.
Oh yeah.
It's almost
perfect way to end it. Yeah.
A profound way to end.
And you almost
all the
wonder,
way to the last song.
Yeah, and you almost wonder when they released this if they knew they were going to quit touring after this.
Well, yeah, because I remember, I had an uncle, my father's brother, that was his youngest brother. What he did is one day he told my sister and I that he was going to come and pick us up, and we were gonna spend this evening with him. And that we could bring one of our, friends with us. Yeah. And we'd go out to dinner, have dinner, and then we would, he would, take us, and we would just go, do stuff. Yeah. So this was a profound day for me. Because we went to dinner and everything. He was a doctor. Okay. So he was very well off, and so we went to a really nice restaurant that had filet mignon. I had never had filet mignon before. Yeah. But then after dinner, he took us down to Sunset Boulevard. Oh, wow. And we were driving down Sunset Boulevard, and this is,
part of
during the 60s, during the
Sunset
hippie
Strip,
era.
Right? Yeah.
And so it was like, to me, that was Disneyland, because I had never seen the hippies before. Wow. And, they were out walking around, you see how the hippies were dressed. And it was just, I was like wide-eyed with my jaw wide open, like, close your mouth, you're going to catch flies, kind of thing. I was just like looking out the window, and just, it was a completely different world to me. Wow. And then after that, then he took us all to go see the movie Woodstock. Oh, wow. Because it was being premiered at some gigantic theater, and we watched the movie Woodstock. Wow. And so we're standing in line, and I could smell people smoking weed, and here I am, just a middle school kid. Back in those days, they used to call it junior high school.
Yeah,
but today they call it middle school.
Yeah.
And I'm a middle school aged kid, and, and I'm smelling weed for the first time.
Oh, wow.
You can imagine, as a kid, these are profound. I remember that day as clear as a bell today because it was a very profound day. I experienced things on that day that I had never experienced before.
Life-altering changes, things you've never experienced. That's great.
Yes. I watched, all those bands performing at Woodstock. Let me see her name. I mean,
Joan Baez. Joan Baez.
No. To me, she was the Axl Rose of that time. Janis Joplin.
Yeah, Grace Slick from Jefferson.
Janis Joplin. She had a voice that no one had ever heard before.
Yeah, I'll tell you, one of my favorite tracks by her, I don't know if you've ever heard the song Mercedes-Benz, but another guy that does a great version of that is Gilby Clarke on one of his solo albums. That's a pretty rockin' tune, for a chick. I just got to say, check it out. Yeah.
Well, when I was watching that movie Woodstock, I was watching all of these bands. Santana, when they were early in their career, I'm watching. It was just Jimi Hendrix doing the Star Spangled Banner.
The Who was even on there.
I'm watching it for the first time before it became this big deal. Where after this, now there's that poster of him with the white Stratocaster, playing the Star Spangled Banner. I was watching that movie when it was just being premiered. And so it was a very profound day. And this is that time period, that same time period when Sgt. Pepper's was out, and
Gar,
the big social and cultural shift had already occurred, and it was in just full swing. But had it not been for the Beatles, that huge cultural and social shift would not have occurred. And I wouldn't have been watching Woodstock and all of this stuff. And I wouldn't be going down Sunset Boulevard seeing the hippies for the first time. Being so mesmerized by this whole culture thing that I had never seen before.
And that had to be amazing, kind of seeing the Sunset Strip area around that time, back in that time, and then I'm sure years later to be able to get on some of those stages, that had to be pretty amazing.
Yes. All of that, the Whisky A Go Go was in full swing. All of these legendary, places that by today, the Troubadour. Nowadays, like some of these places are on the verge of going under. But back in this time, this is their heyday. This is, when, as a trivia, somebody asked me, I think it was my son-in-law, just kind of testing me, because he considers me like the all authority on music and stuff. But he asked me, what was the troubadour, the person that it was named after? And I knew the answer, Doug Weston's Troubadour. Because that's what it used to be called.
And I'm sure
Doug Weston's Troubadour.
I'm sure he wanted to know who is Doug Weston.
People only know it as the Troubadour. But it's just one of those things. Do I know everything about music? No.
I'll give you.
But I certainly know a lot because I lived it, I experienced it, I absorbed it like a sponge. It wasn't I was trying to learn it to memorize it to become some all authority on it.
You lived it,
when you're living it,
you don't know.
It's just becoming so profound. You're like a sponge.
I mean, do you think the Beatles 50 years ago when they were recording this stuff? Do you think they had any idea that they'd go on to become the legendary band they are today? Probably not.
I guarantee you, nobody knows.
And
this when they're doing it, how profound it's going to be. Yeah. I think it scared them.
Yeah, and you know what's funny about talking about some of these, especially the Sunset Strip bands, like from the '80s. There's some bands you'll see on Facebook that they made a little dent. Like as far as on the club scene, they never had like any kind of like major breakout hit or anything. But you remember names from back in the day. Even like Lancia and Paradise. You see all these bands that they were they came close to making but they didn't quite hit it. Odin, yeah. That's a name, but it's kind of interesting too because here's a bit of trivia I'll throw out for you. Another guy I'm sure you've heard of. Like I'm not that much younger than you. I used to hear back in the 80s and 90s, or I think it was the 90s. They had this metal station down here in Long Beach called KNAC, and you'd always hear them talking about Bill Gazzari.
Oh, his commercials were so legendary. Yeah. To me, they were so hokey.
Yeah, but you remember them.
Everybody had his commercials memorized.
I mean, to me, he was almost...
If those bands don't have the cutest guys, they don't get on my stage.
I mean, all these years later, you still remember that. I mean, to me, he was almost the Cal Worthington of rock and roll,
He was. Yeah. He was. He literally was. And I think he totally enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Being that rock, a hair band 80s, godfather of rock, thing. I think he just absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
And his place was just so legendary.
Yeah.
During that time period, it was just one of the top places to go to. My early experiences of being in my teens and just before my early 20s was a lot of people don't know the really super popular place. The most popular place to go to in Hollywood back in the late 70s, when rock bands like Van Halen was playing in LA, Quiet Riot, because Quiet Riot was playing in LA in the 70s before they became big in the 80s.
Oh, yeah,
They were an LA band, but it was a place called the Starwood.
Oh, yeah.
And the Starwood, of all of the places, they were, that was
the premier place to go
for people to go see a band playing at, and for bands to be playing at. It was like the badge of bands if you got a gig playing at the Starwood.
You made it. That was a big time.
You know what I mean? We're playing. You stick your chest out. We're playing at the Starwood.
Yeah.
But nowadays the Starwood is kind of lost.
Yeah.
In the shuffle because it has a really, really dark history.
Wow.
The whole reason why the place was closed down was because the owner was involved in the Laurel Canyon murders.
Oh wow! Well, I didn't know that. How
Wonderland.
Wow.
That whole thing. Where John Holmes, the porn star, was involved in it and everything like that.
Wow.
Eddie Nash was the owner of the Starwood, and he actually went down for the murders that went down in Laurel Canyon on Wonderland, which is really dark history.
Yeah.
But up until that point, the Starwood was like
King.
The place.
Yeah.
The place. And I remember, once the early '80s hit, there were talk amongst bands and stuff. The Starwood's coming back.
Yeah.
The Starwood's coming back. And it just kind of reminded me of later on when the '80s ended and it was the early '90s. that was the same thing that people were saying in the early 90s. The 80s are coming back,
Yeah,
man.
yeah.
You know, you'd see some guy with his Winger T-shirt or his AC/DC T-shirt on, you know, just saying, "Dude, I'm telling you right now, take it to the bank, man.
Yeah.
The 80s are coming back, man." You know, well, they never came back.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, everything runs its course.
Oh, yeah.
Everything runs its course, and nothing lasts forever.
No.
The only thing that stays the same that I've learned in my life is change.
Oh, yeah. You're definitely right. And you know, getting back to the Beatles, okay, like I would say when the Beatles first came out, they were kind of safe in the sense that even a lot of people's parents liked them back in the day because they thought, oh, they look like such nice English boys. They got clean-cut hairs and stuff. And I think by the time they got to the South, part of the reason they wanted to change, you know, started to grow their hair so drastically long, you know, for back in the day, you know, 1967. I think there's a little rebellion on that part. And then also, like you're saying, change. They're like, okay, we've looked kind of this way for several years. It's time kind of to change our image, change our look. Let's you know, they started growing beards and mustaches, and I think there's a little rebellion in that, you know.
Well, they were trying to take control of their lives away from the record companies because, you know, if you let the record companies, especially at that time, if you let them run your life, you're just going to be a packaged commodity for the rest of your life. And they felt very confined by all of that. And so that was it was a definite pushback, you know, at the whole thing because, you know, it wasn't, you know, too much. I think they maybe lasted about 2 or 3 years after that before they finally had enough with it because, you know, I think when you have that kind of success, and you have that kind of, you know, where virtually every word that comes out of your mouth can be construed wrong.
Oh, yeah.
You know, or taken and twisted it into a negative way. You know, when your life becomes something like that, it becomes scary.
Oh, yeah, and you know...
And you know, you know, now we all can kind of look back on it and see, you know, how those, you know, how these things can be. But, you know, when it's actually happening, you know, people are just starting to get their minds wrapped around it. But by the time it reached this point, their popularity was so huge. And you know, for some people, they could walk on water. For other people, when you become like that, where you can walk on water, now it becomes time to try to tear you down.
Oh, yeah.
And it just becomes, you know, this whole scary thing. And I think that had the biggest you know, push as to why the band eventually wound up breaking up. I think a lot of people want to blame it on Yoko, and I'm sure she had a negative effect. You know, but you can't blame it. You can't simplify life. Life is not black and white. Life has black and white and a whole bunch of gray areas too. And there has to be like you know, like 100 or 1,000 you know, contributing factors into why they wound up breaking up. But I think you know, when you really kind of culminate it, they just reached a point where they had enough. It just, you know, it got to the point where anything anybody could wind up saying, you can't talk without a microphone being in front of you.
Oh, yeah. And
you know, and whatever you say can be twisted into something negative, and it, you know, I think all of them just reached a point where I got to get my life back.
Oh, yeah.
Under control. You know, I have to start getting my life back to normal.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I think part of that was that as much success they had, that's part of what killed the band. And because I was reading something where John Lennon told somebody that you know, I feel that, you know, this time to kind of end the band because we could put out like the shittiest album and people would still buy it because it's the Beatles. He felt, I guess, that no matter what they put out, it would be successful. And I guess he wanted to go and kind of do new things, and that's why the guys all eventually went off and did their own solo careers. But I will say this, Gar, you were talking about their appearance on the Ed Sullivan earlier, and at the beginning of the interview, and I gotta tell you, I think you'll have an appreciation for this since you play in a tribute band. I gotta say, of all the tribute bands out there, I think the kind of a premier Beatles tribute, especially here in LA, would be the Fab Four. I seen them last time. I seen them was at the Orange County
Artie,
Fair.
The bass player, is a very good friend of mine.
But I gotta tell you, I seen them at the Orange County Fair a few years ago. And they have a guy that kind of comes out and he's kind of a host of a show. They have him dressed up as Ed Sullivan, and then they recreate Sgt Pepper's Lonely Hearts and a lot of the big hits. But I swear, you look at these guys and you'd swear the Beatles were standing right before you.
Well, can I share a little bit about Artie?
Sure, we'd love to hear that.
Okay, I was working at this huge musical instrument retail company.
Okay.
I don't like to mention their name.
I hear you. I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
But I was working for them at the time, and this was back in the early 90s, when I met him, and he came into the store, and we were just talking, and not salesman customer kind of talk.
Just
it
music.
Was just chewing the fat.
Yeah.
And so of course I was asking, as one musician to another, so what are you doing these days?
Yeah.
And he said, I just got a gig with the Beatles tribute band.
Yeah.
And I kind of looked at him quizzically, because the only Beatles tribute band that I knew of was one called Rain.
Okay,
but I knew that they weren't together at that time.
Yeah.
So he really didn't tell me the name of the Beatles tribute band. Yeah. But he was just telling me that he just got a gig with them, and he was really excited at the time. He was just like really excited.
I bet. Yeah.
To him, it was just this really cool new ball of wax. Wow. To shape into.
Yeah.
And because we had such a good rapport, whenever he needed equipment, he would always call me, and I would, I would get him whatever he would need, and everything like that.
Wow.
And over the years, as time would go by, we would, it wasn't just salesman, customer thing. We would always choose
fellow musician,
And there were other times that I would talk to him, and he would tell me, about how, because he was a right-handed bass player.
Oh, wow, interesting.
And he was telling me, about how he had actually taught himself how to play bass and still be able to sing.
Wow.
And do it left-handed. Now, put your mind wrapped around that. That is huge. That, for me, that's a measuring stick.
Oh, yeah.
Because eventually I became involved in doing tribute band stuff.
Of course,
I never forgot that.
Wow.
That was a measuring stick for me.
Wow.
How far you will go, and the extreme amount of difficulty. It's like relearning the instrument. It really is, to learn how to play it left-handed, and to reach the proficiency to be able to play your instrument and be able to do the lead vocals, all the Paul McCartney stuff that he sang, and to be able to do all of that. That just takes a huge amount of reshift and dedication, and a huge amount of work.
Yeah, because I will say, anybody listening to this,
people that don't really understand, to be able to learn how to play an instrument is difficult enough.
Yeah.
but to rework what you already know and be able to do it and take it to the level that where you can perform.
Oh, yeah.
Performance level. Not just learning how to do it and, hey, see what I can do, but to take it to performance level where you're a paying audience that, okay, now give me my money's worth, because if people are paying, this is not going to be taken lightly if they're disappointed. You see what I'm saying?
I will say this.
Taking it to that level,
I will say
that's a huge amount of work and dedication.
This is rock and roll theater, and I mean, anybody that has seen this band, the Fab Four, I would say they're like the premier Beatles tribute in LA, and they don't just play the songs. They, like you said, they look the part. I mean, when I went to see them at the Orange County Fair a few years ago, they did a dynamic. They gave the audience a little surprise. Like I was expecting to hear a Beatles tune. I wasn't necessarily expecting to hear "Imagine" by John Lennon, but the guy came out and was playing the piano, and it was a nice little kind of extra little thing to give to the fans. But if you're a Beatles fan, that's definitely one band you'd want to check in. I got to ask, you ever get to see Artie play?
Absolutely. Can I share you another thing about Fab Four?
Yeah.
In the early 2000s, I was working for a different musical instrument company, and Rollo, the drummer, it's actually two stories. Rollo, the drummer, came in, and of course, talking to him, just chewing the fat. And the first thing that he was telling me about, because he used to come in a number of times, he told me about how before their performance, it took at least an hour for him to put on the nose.
Oh, wow.
So he would look like Ringo.
Oh, wow. See, that's dedication. I had no idea. I mean, I could just tell you.
A lot of people see that, he would put a lot of people didn't know that was a prosthetic nose.
Wow,
but that's how far they would go.
That's the length of dedication. Wow.
And he would literally, before every show, he would have to dedicate an hour before the show to just putting on the nose.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
and then another thing that they did that no other tribute band has done, they put out a Christmas album.
Oh, wow.
Rollo came in and told me, and he gave it to me.
Oh, wow.
It was their Christmas album. That what they did is they went into the recording studio and they re-recorded Christmas songs as if the Beatles.
Wow, that's original. It. That's original creation. Wow.
And I have to tell you, the job they did was absolutely spot on, amazing.
Wow.
It really sounded like it was the Beatles.
Oh, yeah.
If you didn't tell me that it wasn't the Beatles, I would have thought it was the Beatles.
Oh,
That is how good they did it. And after he gave it to me, of course I was working in a mall. I was working in the Ontario Mills Mall at that time. And I would go to the food court for lunch, because there was a favorite place that I had to get lunch in the food court, and I would walk by the music store, because back in those days,
music stores still, right?
Record stores was a normal mainstay inside of a mall. You didn't have a mall without a record store.
Hey, Gar, I got to interrupt you for a minute.
The record store, and right there in the front was the Fab Four's Christmas album.
Oh, wow. Hey, I got to interrupt you here for a minute. This is going to take you back, but when referencing record and music stores, do you remember back in the day they actually had Sam Goody, The Warehouse, Music Plus?
Those were all. Where do you think I was?
Tower Records. That was the best one of all. Yeah. I mean,
I was in those Sam Goodies. I was in those Music Pluses. I was in those Warehouse.
And even Tower Records.
I was in those Licorice Pizza.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Actually, it was Licorice Pizza, which morphed into Sam Goody, and then of course the ultimate record place was Tower Records. I mean, you go and you find almost anything you were looking for. And what's sad is one by one they all kind of went out of business. And
well, you know that everything takes its course.
Yeah.
And that's just what I've learned. You know, over nothing lasts.
But it's
forever.
amazing because you say that, but as you're living it and going through it, it's kind of a very sad thing. Because on one hand, like you're talking about, vinyl's kind of made a comeback. That's cool. But then we had tapes and CDs and DVDs, and there's Blu-rays, and I mean, they even had at one point like M3 files where people could, you didn't even have something you could really hold in your hand, but you could hold your music on this little tiny disc, and it just kind of makes you think, because who knows what's going to be the next big thing in technology, even 1-2 years from now.
I have no idea, but I just,
know what's going to be there.
It doesn't seem to make sense to me that something big
is on the way.
It's going to have some kind of a cultural shift that the current generations are going to be able to grab onto. That's their own. But just like everything else, those things that they hold dear to them, that mean so much to them, is eventually going to take their courses too.
I mean,
going to be long gone by the time that happens for them. But, until they experience it, I don't think that the current generations will understand
what we experience. I mean, it's almost like
profound things that my generation holds so dear.
I mean, it's kind of funny, but I mean, I remember even asking like my grandmother, when I was much younger, hey grandma, what was it like when they had black and white TV? What was it like, for electricity?
When I was a little kid, all the cartoons were in black and white.
But it's kind of funny because
watch, let me see, Felix the Cat.
Oh yeah, I remember.
It was all in black and white.
Yeah.
There was another cartoon that was really popular in that time, Gigantor.
Oh wow.
Gigantor.
Yeah. You're taking me back. Yeah. And then
as a kid, I loved that cartoon, and I look back at it now, I scratch my head. What?
Yeah, even like
that was a big deal to me.
Yeah, and, it's funny. Like I even remember like TV shows back in the day, like Bewitched with Elizabeth Montgomery, where she's a witch and everything, and
Mr. Ed.
Yeah, it started out black and white, and then I remember when they colorized it. My friend had told me like even I Love Lucy was of course black and white, but then
Dennis the Menace.
Yeah, but my friend was saying like I Love Lucy. He got a DVD collection where they colorized it, and he says it was kind of interesting to see that in color, but I'm so used to seeing it in black and white, it was kind of weird at the same time.
Well, it's kind of neat because what they originally when they first started colorizing, it was very hokey and it didn't look real. But nowadays, because they have such a refined technology, when they colorize it, it looks
amazing.
It looks amazing. So you really do kind of get the feel of what things look like back in those days.
Oh yeah.
Because when you're missing the color, you're kind of missing. You're associating the 40s.
Oh yeah.
The 50s. The 30s, the 40s with. You think that people walked around in the streets in black and white.
No, but
when you're watching these movies, that's the only reference you have. But it's to me now to see things with the new technology that's been colorized. It really kind of adds dimension to it. Now.
Even when I'm watching a regular TV, like on some of these HD channels, like I was watching an old episode the other night of the Golden Girls, and it looks so kind of funky because you see just some moving their hands, and it looks like a real person standing there in front of you, and it looks like they're really moving their hand right in front of you. But it's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah. Getting back to the Beatles, though, I got to ask, because one of the unique things everybody loves so much about the Beatles is everybody kind of had their favorite Beatle. One of my favorite bands, Kiss, they used to say, Paul and Gene, they were really influenced by the Beatles as far as, songwriters and stuff, and they were saying, we're kind of like a hard rock Beatles, where Kiss like the Beatles too. Everybody kind of has their favorite member. Now, when you we're getting the Beatles, did you have, I'm kind of interested to hear, did you have a favorite member of a Beatle?
Well, because because I was a boy, I never really looked at it that way, so I didn't really have a favorite Beatle.
Well, I mean, I guess kind of like I was kind of interested.
The girls, you know, more had that kind of a thing.
Yeah, I guess what I'm asking is
I was just, you know, I was just more mesmerized by the guitars, the amps. You know, those Rickenbacker guitars was a big deal to me. Yeah. Those Vox amplifiers with the piggyback heads. I guess. And everything. That would, to me, that was. You know, so I was more kind of looking at it more from a boy's standpoint.
Well, I guess what I was asking, not so much that, but I guess what I was asking is like, I was kind of interested in finding out, is since, you know, you're getting into Beatles when you're really young, about age 5, that's kind of your formative years. You're saying I didn't even like play an instrument. I was very young at the time, so I was kind of interested in finding out if the fact that you would later on go become a bass player, if like when you really got into the songs, like if you were more into Paul's bass playing, more into singing, or more of a John Lennon fan, or kind of, because I think that'd be kind of interesting to kind of, you know, you're just
bass. The number one reason why I became a bass player was this 60s.
Okay. Wow.
We were having a family get together at Southgate Park. For 4th of July. Yeah. It was a 4th of July. They were going to have a fireworks show at, you know, later on that night. But, you know, our whole family was having a barbecue at this park. And, you know, I was just, you know, out on the grass. My cousins took off, you know, because they were a little bit older than my sister and I, so we had to kind of stay closer to the family because, you know, we were younger, and I was just out on the grass trying to catch butterflies.
That's
catch some, you know, stuff like that, trying to catch them. And all of a sudden, my cousins came running up to my sister and I, and they said, "You guys got to come with us." And I looked up and I go, "What? Why? Just come, right?" And so we, you know, they were running. So we started running with them, and they took me to this auditorium. Oh, wow. And so when we walked in, there was a rock band playing. And so this rock, I remember they were playing Sunshine of Your Love. Oh, wow. By Cream.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I sit down with my cousin Frank, and so I'm listening to the band, and they are freaking loud. Wow. Right? This is a loud rock band, and I had never seen anything like that before.
Oh, that's your...
And I remember that, you know, what was really getting my attention was the bass was pounding on my chest.
Oh, wow.
And you know, it's just like, you know, I could feel it. Oh, and, wow. And that
was your introduction.
There was this, I could feel it.
Yeah.
And I went to my cousin and I said, my cousin Frank, and I asked him, "What's that thing that's pounding on my chest?" And then he pointed to the guy and he goes, "See that guy over there that's got that guitar? And it's got 4 strings on it, and they're really fat?" And I go, "Yeah?" And he goes, "That's what's pounding on your chest. What he's playing is what you're feeling."
Oh, wow.
And boom. Wow. Pivotal moment.
There you go.
From that moment on, when I went home, I was bugging my parents about getting a bass guitar.
Yeah. You know, and talking about some of these songs, I tell you, I really love, like, the title track, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club. To me, something about it reminds me of Yellow Submarine, in the sense that it's kind of, it's such a different kind of sounding tune. And then I also love A Little Help from My Friends. Now, I was reading about that today, and it was saying kind of how each of the guys kind of trade off on a verse. That was the fact that they were talking about kind of, you know, what they all meant to each other, and they want to have all 4 guys involved in the song. So that was kind of a interesting kind of thing to learn. But I tell you, the song I really love is Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. I'm sure you know as a Beatles fan.
Very artistic.
There's a bit of a controversy for years because people started saying, "Oh, wait a minute, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. If you abbreviate that, it spells out LSD. They must have been doing LSD." I mean, who would think of such a thing? But that was a rumor for you.
I mean, when you listen to those lyrics, I mean,
yeah.
what does it reek?
Yeah,
it reeks LSD.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, and LSD was just there was the hippie movement with Timothy Leary, who was this college professor with an extremely high IQ. That quit being a professor and tune in and drop out was one of his catchphrases.
Oh, okay.
He was part of this whole LSD movement.
Oh, wow.
Of everybody should experience LSD.
Wow.
And then at the same time, how their stuff was being started to be construed negatively. The vice president of the United States, who was Lyndon Johnson.
Wow, just think about that. That's so far back they go.
He got up and he made a speech where he was denouncing, how rock and roll was having a negative effect on our young kids. I get high with a little help from my friends.
Oh, wow. That's interesting to learn.
And this is being said in a speech, speaking very negatively about, the Beatles. And, see what I'm saying? How whatever you do, it was just being turned into something negative.
And then, it's almost like that theory you always hear, what goes up must come down, or once you become real huge, like you're saying, people want to tear you down. And when the Beatles were long gone in the 70s, Richard Nixon was so much like he felt such a threat from John Lennon. He was trying to do everything he could do to deport the guy. I mean, it was a big story back in the day,
Well, but then again, you go move, on Lovely Rita was like still kind of, and that was on Sgt Pepper's, and that really cut Michelle, my bell. It's like right in that kind of vein. So it was a real, it was
page turner.
Sgt Pepper's was one of the first of the conceptual rock albums. That kind of started that whole conceptual thing that the Who kind of took off and ran with. But it was really more than just a conceptual. It was loosely conceptual. But it just had a whole mix match of different songs that were so different from each other. When John was doing Lucy in the Sky, that song became really popular at that time.
I mean, it's one of the songs I still remember, that I just love every time I hear it, But it's kind of interesting because as great as everything the Beatles did, like you were kind of saying earlier, this stuff like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, A Little Help from My Friends, that is so vastly different than, let's say, like I Want to Hold Your Hand or Ticket to Ride. I mean, by that time they had really advanced as musicians and songwriters.
Well, and then we're with Peter Grant too. I mean, it's just it was all a together thing. It wasn't just the Beatles. Peter Grant had a big part in doing what they did.
Oh, okay. Wow.
I think it was Peter Grant. It was the producer.
No. Okay, Peter Grant, if I'm not mistaken, he was Led Zeppelin. I think who you're talking about, George Martin.
George Martin. Yes. My mistake. George Martin.
Peter Grant, from what I've read,
he had a lot to do with
the sound.
With this whole how it turned out. Using production. Production that had never been done on an album.
He was considered like the fifth Beatle, but I mean, he died just like 2 or 3 years ago. So, like you said, he was like such a big part of what they did. But I think that's pretty much all I got to say about this album, Gar, unless you have anything else you'd like to add.
Well, there's a song on there called "When I'm 64."
Oh, interesting.
And,
yeah.
A few days ago, I just turned 64.
Wow.
So that song kind of, it's kind of ironic about the timing, about talking about the Beatles talking about Sgt. Pepper's.
Yeah, talk about irony. I mean, that's kind of interesting. That's cool. And interesting thing is like Ringo and Paul are still alive, and they're way past 64. The other two guys never made it to 64, but unfortunately. But talk about irony. So you mentioned that, and then. There's the fact that you mentioned Cream one time during this interview, and we're going next time when we do is we're going to be talking about Cream's Wheels of Fire album. So just talk about irony there, and you were also mentioning Woodstock, and in a few weeks we'll be talking about the Who because and it's interesting you brought up Woodstock because I learned a few weeks ago that the Who actually played Woodstock. I wasn't really aware of that, but if you go to like www.woodstock.com, that's the official site for Woodstock. You can go click on 1969. It'll give you a set list of all the bands that played there. And I was surprised to learn, like you said, Santana played Woodstock. Even the band Mountain with Leslie West. That was one of their first early gigs, and a lot of people aren't aware of it. They even played that gig.
Crosby, Stills, and Nash.
Yeah.
Played at Woodstock.
10 years after. 10
years after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Creedence.
So I've said this a number of times in interviews. I was extremely lucky to be born when I was born and be able to live during this time and experience all of this stuff because that's why I posted these albums as influential on me on Facebook is because now I get a chance to kind of explain why they were so influential. It wasn't my favorite record to put on and listen to.
Yeah, they had an influence.
What's coming out in these interviews is how profound of an effect that these, in leading me towards becoming a musician.
Yeah, and I think
being that kind of carrot, I guess you would say.
I think the most interesting thing I learned about you today is the fact that this album came out in 1967, and that tell me you're just 5 years old at the time, and it's just kind of your formative years. And you discovered...
See what I mean? I was really, really young, but yet, see how much I remember?
And then, it's interesting.
You don't remember things unless they're really profound.
And then, it's interesting, too, because you think at 5 years old, this album had such a major impact on you. I mean, you took that much notice of it, and you're still talking about it 50 years later,
Yes, hugely influential on me way before I ever became a musician.
Yeah,
hopefully people that really don't know anything about the Beatles that might, listen to this interview might be able to kind of visualize, how profound of an effect that they had. It wasn't just a band.
Yeah.
They had social impacts. They had musical impacts.
Yeah.
They had fashion impacts.
Yeah.
It just was a broad range. There's just this dividing line of how things were before they hit and after they hit. It was very profound that I've never really seen, and I just really hope that current generations are able to have something that has that same kind of profound effect.
Oh yeah, and I just heard
that might have the same, where it'll have social shifts, fashion shifts, musical shifts, and more than just one small area, just a large shift.
And
they maybe can have something that they can experience and hold dear to themselves. So when they reach my age, they can maybe be interviewed by somebody else and
Yeah.
help somebody else to visualize how profound those things were on themselves.
Oh yeah, and I'll just urge anybody listening to this, if the Beatles are a little before your time, I urge you just to go check it, this album or anything by the Beatles on YouTube, before you go and buy it. But I think you'll be pleasantly surprised and you'll be impressed by anything by the Beatles. So thanks for doing this, Gar. I really do appreciate it. And I'll be talking to you again real soon. Thanks, buddy.
Okay. I'd like to say thank you to everyone that wished me a happy birthday last weekend. I had probably one of the nicest birthdays I think I can remember.
That's nice.
So I just definitely wanted to thank everyone for the warm birthday wishes. It was very, very humbly appreciated.
Well, thanks again, Gar. We appreciate you, and I'm glad you enjoyed your birthday. We'll be talking to you again real soon. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you, Jason.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.